You walked out of that supermarket with a full bag of steak and $40 still sitting in your pocket. Same meat, same store, same weekend. I did it, and I want to show you exactly how. Here is the truth I learned too late. The supermarket sells you the cut, not the beef, and the cut is where they hide the markup. I spent 30 years paying premium prices for steak that came from the very same piece of meat sitting 3 feet away for half the cost. I just did not know how to ask for it. This is not some restaurant trick or chef nonsense. This is the way butchers worked before the plastic tray and the shrink wrap took over, and by the end I will show you a cut that a university study in the year 2000 proved was the second most tender muscle in the entire animal, hidden in plain sight and sold as hamburger. I remember standing in the meat aisle of my local store one Friday, holding 2 packages, and noticing they had the exact same beef inside but a $9 difference in price. That moment changed how I shop forever. And everything I am about to tell you, you can do this week with the same fridge and the same cheap knife you already own. Let me start with the thing that saved me the most money, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Have you ever wondered why one steak costs $20 a pound and the roast right beside it costs $8 when they are cut from the same part of the cow? For years I assumed the expensive one was simply better beef, higher grade, some secret quality I could not see. I was wrong, and being wrong cost me hundreds of dollars a year. Here is what is actually happening. When you buy a New York strip steak already cut, portioned, and sitting pretty on a foam tray, you are not just paying for the meat, you are paying for the labor of the person who cut it, the packaging, the weight loss to trimming, and the store's markup on convenience. But that same New York strip comes from a long piece of beef called the strip loin, the whole primal cut, and the store will very often sell you the entire strip loin at a roast price if you know to ask. I tested this myself. I asked the man behind the counter for a whole beef strip loin uncut. He looked at me a little surprised, then went into the back and brought out a piece about the length of my forearm. The pre-cut strip steaks that day were selling for around $14 a pound. The whole strip loin, the exact same muscle, was priced at $7.99 a pound. Literally half the price for the same beef, just because I was willing to slice it at home. I took it home, laid it on my cutting board, and with one ordinary knife I cut it into thick steaks, each one a full 1.25 inches thicker than any steak the store had on display. From that single piece I got 9 steaks. 9. At the pre-cut price, those steaks would have cost me around $60. I paid a little over $30, and the whole cutting took me maybe 8 minutes. This is the oldest trick in the trade, and it is not really a trick at all. It is just the way meat used to be sold. Before the 1950s, most families bought beef from a butcher who broke down large sections of the animal right in front of you, and you told him how you wanted it cut. The pre-portioned, pre-wrapped steak on a tray is a modern invention built entirely around your convenience and their profit margin. The convenience is real, but so is the price you pay for it. Now here's what pulled me deeper. Because saving money on the strip loin was only the beginning, I started wondering, if they mark up the cutting, what else are they marking up that I never questioned? And the answer led me straight to the second biggest saving, one that has nothing to do with cutting at all. Let me ask you something. What time of day do you usually do your grocery shopping? Because the answer might be quietly costing you the best deals in the entire store. For most of my life, I shopped whenever it was convenient. Saturday afternoon, usually, right when the store was busiest and the shelves were freshest. And that, it turns out, is the single worst time to buy meat if you care about your wallet. Because the deepest discounts on steak do not happen when the meat arrives. They happen when the meat is about to reach its sell-by date, and the store has to move it or lose it entirely. Every package of fresh beef has a sell-by date, and the store is legally required to pull it or discount it before that date passes. So what they do, in almost every supermarket in the country, is mark it down. A bright sticker, usually orange or yellow, slapped right over the original price, 30% off, 50% off, sometimes more. And here's the part almost nobody knows. That meat is not going bad. A sell-by date is not a safety date. It is a stock rotation date for the store, a guideline for shelf display, not a warning that the beef will hurt you. I learned to ask the butcher directly, and this is the exact question that changed everything for me. I walked up and simply said, "What time do you put out your markdowns?" He told me. In my store, it was early morning, around 8 in the morning, before the day crowd came in, and again late in the evening near closing. Now I go early. I have walked out with prime steaks marked down 50%, beef I would never have paid full price for, sitting in my cart for the price of ground chuck. And here is what to do with it, because this is the piece people miss. When you find marked down beef that is near its date, you do not have to eat it that night. You take it home and you freeze it immediately if you are not cooking it within a day or two. Beef freezes beautifully. Wrapped well, a good steak holds its quality in the freezer for months, so the sell-by date becomes completely meaningless to you. You are buying quality beef at half price and simply pressing pause on the clock. The United States Department of Agriculture has said plainly, for decades, that a sell-by date is about quality and store rotation, not safety, and that properly handled beef stays perfectly good well past that printed date. I had walked past those orange stickers for 30 years, thinking they meant something was wrong with the meat. They meant the opposite. They meant the store was quietly offering me the best deal in the building, and I kept saying no because nobody ever explained it to me. But the more I saved, the more one uncomfortable thought started to form in the back of my mind. Somebody designed the store this way. Somebody decided which cuts got the fancy name and the fancy price, and which ones got shoved to the bottom shelf. And once I understood how that decision got made, I got a little angry, because I realized how long I had been played. Here is the thing that finally made it click for me. The price of a steak often has very little to do with how good it tastes, and almost everything to do with its name and its reputation. Think about the filet mignon, the most expensive steak in nearly every store and restaurant. Tender, yes. Buttery soft, absolutely. But ask any honest butcher and they will tell you the filet is one of the mildest tasting cuts on the whole animal, because it comes from a muscle called the tenderloin that the cow barely uses. Muscles that do little work, stay tender, but develop little flavor. Meanwhile, some of the most flavorful beef on the entire animal comes from the hard-working muscles of the shoulder and the chuck, cuts that for generations got ground up into hamburger or sold cheap because they had a reputation for being tough. That reputation is where the money hides. The chuck, the shoulder, the area around the blade bone, this is where deep, beefy flavor lives, and it sells for a fraction of the loin cuts. For years, I bought into the idea that expensive meant better, so I paid loin prices and left the flavor bombs sitting in the discount section. I had it exactly backward. Take the chuck roast, around $5 or $6 a pound in most stores, sometimes less on markdown. People think of it only as a pot roast, something you cook for hours until it falls apart, and it is wonderful that way. But inside that chuck are muscles that, cut right, cook up into steaks with more flavor than cuts costing 3 times as much. The problem was never the beef. The problem was that nobody taught us how to handle it, because the cheap cuts do not carry the profit margin, so nobody had a reason to teach us. Now I know what some of you are thinking, and I thought it too. You are thinking this all sounds fine for someone with a big kitchen, fancy knives, and years of practice breaking down meat. You are thinking, I could never do that, I would ruin it, I do not have the tools or the skill. I want to stop right here and talk to you directly, because that exact belief is what kept me overpaying for 30 years, and it is completely false. You do not need a single special thing to do everything I have described. Let me prove it. The only tool you truly need to cut a whole strip loin or a chuck into steaks is one sharp knife, not a set, one. A basic chef's knife, or even a sturdy carving knife you already have in a drawer. The reason people think they need fancy equipment is that they picture a butcher sawing through bone, But the cuts I am telling you to buy, the strip loin, the whole ribeye, these are boneless. You are not sawing through anything. You are simply slicing across a soft piece of beef the way you would slice a loaf of bread. Here is the one technique that makes it foolproof, and you can do it tonight. Look at the meat, and you will see faint lines running through it in one direction. That is the grain, the direction the muscle fibers run. All you do is turn your knife so you are cutting across those lines, not along them. Cutting across the grain shortens the fibers and makes every single bite more tender, even on a cheaper cut. This one thing, cutting across the grain, is the difference between a steak that feels tough and one that feels like it came from a steakhouse, and it costs you nothing but a moment of paying attention. If you want to go even deeper on these kinds of overlooked savings, not just in the meat aisle, but across the way you spend on food every single day, I put everything I know into a book called Meat Smart, part of a wider series that includes Deep Frugal and The Full System. These books go through the full practical picture, the cuts, the timing, the questions to ask, and the habits that quietly add up to hundreds of dollars back in your pocket every year. You can find all the details in the description below, and I think once you start reading, you will see just how many other places the same pattern repeats itself. Now, back to those markdowns, because what the store does next is exactly what most shoppers never find out. If you want even thickness, do what I do. Before I cut, I press the whole piece of beef flat with my hand and eye it into equal sections, then cut each one about 1.25 inches thick, roughly the width of my thumb. Too thin, and it dries out when you cook it. A good thick cut stays juicy and forgiving, even if your pan is a little too hot. There is no skill here. There is only a knife, a cutting board, and the willingness to try it once. After your first strip loin, you will never look at those pre-cut trays the same way again. And for those of you with no interest in cutting anything at all, I have not forgotten you. You can get almost every one of these savings without ever picking up a knife, simply by asking the butcher to cut the whole primal for you. Most stores will do it free or for a tiny charge, and you still pay the lower whole cut price per pound. You just have to ask. That is the whole secret. Asking. The savings were always sitting there waiting for anyone willing to open their mouth and ask a simple question. But even after all this, even after cutting my own steaks and catching the markdowns and buying the cheaper cuts, I discovered there was still one more thing the stores were charging a fortune for that I could do at home for practically nothing. And this one genuinely shocked me. Have you ever seen those special steaks at a fancy butcher shop or a high-end market, the ones labeled dry-aged, selling for $30, $40, even $50 a pound? I always assumed that was pure luxury, something that required a special room, special equipment, months of waiting. I assumed it was completely out of reach for a regular person in a regular house. I was wrong about that too. Dry aging is nothing more than letting beef rest in cold, controlled air so that moisture slowly leaves the meat and natural enzymes break down the muscle, concentrating the flavor and tenderizing the beef from the inside. That is it. That is the entire multi-$1,000 mystique. Time and cold air. And the astonishing thing is you can do a lighter version of it right in your own refrigerator, and it costs you nothing but patience. Here is exactly how I do it and how you can do it this weekend. I take a thick cut of beef, and thick matters here at least 1.5 inches, because a thin steak will just dry out. I pat it completely dry with a paper towel. Then I set it on a wire rack over a plate so air can circulate all the way around it, and I place it uncovered on the bottom shelf of my refrigerator. And I wait. Even 2 or 3 days makes a real noticeable difference. The surface dries slightly, and when I trim that thin outer layer off and cook the steak, the flavor is deeper, richer, more concentrated than anything I ever bought on a tray. Some people go a week or more with larger roasts, but even a few days transforms an ordinary cut. Think about what that means. The dry-aged steak I would have paid $40 a pound for at a specialty shop I am creating at home from beef I bought on markdown for $7 or $8 a pound. The flavor that stores charge a fortune for is not locked behind their doors. It is a natural process that happens for free in the cold, the same way it happened in cellars and cold rooms 100 years ago, before anyone thought to put a luxury price tag on it. And that word natural is exactly what got me thinking about where all of this really came from, because none of these methods are new, not one. Every single thing I have shown you is something people simply knew back when they bought meat from a person instead of a shelf. And that brings me to the one discovery that pulls all of this together, the cut I promised you at the very beginning, the one hiding in plain sight. For most of the last century, there was a muscle in the cow's shoulder that butchers almost never sold as steak. It sat up near the blade bone, in the section called the chuck, and because a tough band of connective tissue ran right through the middle of it, nobody thought it was good for anything but grinding into hamburger or slow cooking into stew. Millions of pounds of it, year after year, ground up and sold for next to nothing. Some of the best beef on the entire animal treated like scrap. Then something happened. Around the year 2000, researchers at the University of Nebraska and the University of Florida ran a massive study funded through the beef industry's own research program, where they set out to map every single muscle in the cow. They called it muscle profiling. They tested each muscle for tenderness, for flavor, for value, looking for cuts that were being wasted. It was, in a sense, buried research, a systematic hunt for hidden treasure inside an animal everyone thought they already understood completely. And what they found in that shoulder muscle stunned them. When they took that tough band of tissue out of the middle, splitting the muscle into two clean pieces, what remained was, by their own measurements, the second most tender muscle in the entire animal. Second only to the tenderloin, the very muscle that filet mignon comes from, the most expensive cut in the store. The beef that had been ground into hamburger for generations tested nearly as tender as the priciest steak on the menu, and it carried far more flavor. They gave it a name so it could be sold as what it truly was. They called it the flat iron steak. And if you have seen flat iron steak appear on menus and in supermarket cases over the last 20 years, now you know where it came from. It did not exist as a steak before that study named it and showed the world how to cut it. It was hiding in plain sight the entire time, inside a cut people threw in the cheap bin. Here is why this matters to you. Standing in the meat aisle this week, that same shoulder region, the top blade, is still one of the cheapest sections in the store. You can often buy the whole top blade roast or ask the butcher for it for a fraction of what a tenderloin costs. And with that one technique I taught you, cutting with attention and going across the grain, you can bring home a steak that a peer-reviewed university study ranked just below the filet mignon in tenderness for a small fraction of filet mignon money. I have done it. I have served flat iron steak to people who swore it was the most expensive cut I could have bought, and I paid almost nothing for it. That is the whole picture. The strip loin sold whole for half the pre-cut price. The markdown stickers that mean opportunity, not spoilage. The flavorful shoulder cuts dismissed as tough because nobody profited from teaching you otherwise. The dry aging you can do in your own refrigerator for free, chingada, and a steak proven by science to rival the most expensive cut in the building, sitting there in the cheap section, waiting for you to ask for it by name. None of this was ever a secret in the true sense. It was just quietly allowed to be forgotten, because a confused shopper who buys by the pretty label is worth more to a store than one who knows how to ask for a whole primal and slice it at home. The knowledge did not vanish. It got crowded out by foam trays and shrink wrap and the comfortable habit of never questioning the price on the sticker. I spent 30 years being that confused shopper. 30 years of paying double for the labor of a cut I could do myself in 8 minutes, of walking past markdown stickers I thought meant danger, of believing the expensive name meant better beef. When I add up what that cost me over all those years, it is not $40. It is thousands. And the thing that stings is that every bit of it was recoverable knowledge, sitting in old butchering habits and a university study I had never heard of, just waiting for someone to say it out loud. So the next time you stand in that meat aisle, I want you to feel what I feel now. Not confusion, not that quiet worry that you are being charged too much and cannot prove it. I want you to feel like the person who knows exactly where the value is hiding, because now you do. You are not the shopper they built that aisle for anymore. You are the one who walks out with a bag full of steak and $40 still in your pocket, smiling, because you finally learned to ask the right questions. If you have ever felt like the simple, honest way of doing things got quietly buried under a fancier, costlier version that works worse, then you and I are the same kind of person, and you are in the right place. The old methods were not primitive. They were smart. We just stopped being told about them. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this directly, so please take a second and leave me a comment. I want to know, when you looked at that flat iron steak story, had you ever heard that it used to be thrown into the hamburger grinder, or is this the first you are learning of it? Tell me in the comments below. And tell me where you are watching from, because I love seeing how far this old knowledge travels. Have you ever bought one of those markdown steaks with the orange sticker, or did you always walk past them like I used to? If saving $40 on one trip felt good, then subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are digging up the practical knowledge that got shoved aside to protect somebody else's profit. This is a growing group of people who refuse to keep overpaying for what our grandparents did for pennies. Because next time, I am going to show you the forgotten way to keep vegetables fresh for weeks longer without a single special gadget, a storage method that home kitchens used for generations before the refrigerator door bin ever existed, and it will change what you throw away every week. Stay with me. There is so much more they hoped we would forget. Now, this video showed you the strip loin trick, but there's so much more. Inside the Old Ways Society, I pick up right where this left off, and you can ask me your own questions about your store, your cuts, and I answer you myself, not some machine. Folks like you already belong in here with us. Just point your phone at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. Come join me.